Friday. Well, thank you all for joining us for this month's webinar on family literacy. It's just really great to see everybody, and I am coming to you from Crystal Mountain Resort. I hope you're having a great Friday. This is such an important topic as we talk about embedding and looking at family literacy within our adult alternative and community education program. So many of us are doing great work, but this PD we're really focused on how we can better integrate a lot of these strategies into our programs. And we'll talk a little bit about the logistics. We'll talk a little bit about the programming. We can even have a conversation around funding, because that's always important to talk about. How do we actually do and simulate some of these educational opportunities if it doesn't quite align with our funding metrics and things of that nature. So thanks for joining us. A few housekeepings we're going to record. We're also going to ask that if you need sketches, you can go in and put them on that Google form. And I'll show you the Google form in a second. We'll make sure all the materials are available to you. And then if you have to bow out or anything like that, or those of you that are registered and signed up but aren't able to attend today, you can go back and watch the recording and apply for sketches through the end of May. And then since it's just a small group of us this morning, if you have things, questions, comments, you can either put them in the chat or feel free to unmute since you're such a small, I want this to be conversational and less of a presentation per se. So let me know if the Google form works, but I will show you what is on the form. So here's the form. It's a little, open up in your view so that you can see that. So you'll go through and put your email, your name, your personal identification code for sketches, and then you'll click the family literacy programming and then click submit, and that will serve as your attendance for today. And then allow about a week or two for us to get that put into the MOEX system. And then you should get an email from MOEX saying that you're attended and you have to answer those 2 questions. Remember that part. A lot of folks forget that part sometimes, but you actually have to respond to those 2 questions. So wanted to start by asking, what are some of the family literacy programming activities that your program has previously conducted? You can either put that into the chat or unmute and add in, but what are some of the activities that you guys are currently doing or have been thinking about?
I think as far as family literacy goes, in our program, I don't, at my location especially, I don't think we really have anything titled family literacy. We have, just literacy that goes on through our ESL program. But I feel like this is an area where we need to grow and develop a little bit more.
Do you want to add a little bit about maybe, is there something that why you feel like that you want to add things there? Is there something like questions that people have asked, or as a team has the topic kind of come up about, like what's kind of the underlying thing there that's kind of been motivating you to kind of think about this?
It really hasn't, but we have so many, I just had a student that came in and she has 5 children and she brought them all in with her because she needed to get her enrollment paperwork done, and she's been waiting for a while. She was trying to find a good night because she has 5 children, and I don't know, I was just thinking we used to have some even books, but just to pull that family together for the importance of that, I guess I feel like I just don't feel like we have anything, because we're so focused on getting students, not kids, right? Students through their program and getting them through their diploma. And so we don't focus on that. And we're working on, I think Diane, one of our other teachers, is working a lot on trying to pull community things together and do community and community activities, but it's our our program is very spread out. We have several locations. And so being a community, being out there in the community, we do Sparta. I'm Sparta Adult Ed. And we have our location in Comstock Park. So she's working on the Comstock Park area. But to pull us together as a program, I feel like is harder to do. And to even, I think we're going to have to focus on this, come up with it as a plan for our adult ed program altogether. And then we have to see how it best fits into each location. So, but yeah, I don't feel like we really have anything for it so at all. And so and it's important, having them know how to communicate and read and, at all different levels, and to do that with their children is important, I think. Does that help? Does that answer a few questions?
Absolutely. No, I was taking lots of notes. You hit on a lot of the points that I hope we'll talk about today. So that's really great. Carol, anything come to your mind? Not to put you on the spot, and if not, that's okay.
No, that's fine. Although Troy School District has family literacy activities in our adult ed ESL program, I'm not familiar with any. I can say that as an ESL teacher and the other teachers, we encourage our adult students to read books with their children, however they want to. You read one page, your child reads one page. And we encourage them, and we practice role playing on how they might go in to talk with their child's teacher. But I can't think of any direct activities, because in our classes, in our in-person classes, we really don't want children in the classes. They're distracting. If there's a half day of school and it's between the student being absent or they have to bring a child, we kind of leave it up to the parent to do that if they think they're going to be able to concentrate. Then in our virtual classes, I mean, it happens. The parent is on the Zoom call in class and the child just says, wow, my mom or dad is home, I want their attention. So we often see them on the camera, which is fine. But back to your question, I really can't think of anything that we really do together other than just promote, hey, it's good to spend time reading both books in English and in your native language with your family members. Make sure that you're speaking at least 20 to 40 minutes a day in English, and also use your native language. But other than the promotional part, I can't think of what we do in ESL.
We'll bring up some great challenges, especially with our adult learner population, of the stressors that they have, the responsibilities that they have as parents, and then how do we continue to provide them a quality educational experience without, sometimes children in the classroom can be extremely distracting, not only to that singular parent, but to others in the classroom as well. But then how do we really, promote that in a well-rounded manner? And much of our programming, I think, is such a family learning service. I mean, we're servicing the entire family in some aspects even though we're only serving an adult parent, but we really are kind of touching and helping the entire family unit. And that can have its real challenges when we try to balance the care that we want to provide, but also the responsibilities that we have from an educational standpoint to get our adult learners to the credentials that they need or to the outcomes that they're looking for. So thank you both for sharing, because I think that's really important. And I hope we can touch on some of those kind of key components today and really look at what are some strategies to kind of incorporate. So
if it's okay, there's just one other thing I was thinking about pointing out is that, my students, they don't like to read long things. They don't like to read passages that are long, or which is a problem, I think, when it comes to trying to help them learn to read documents that are necessary for them to fill out, or, you know, legal papers, or I just, you know, as we're talking about it, I'm just thinking of all these things that they need to do, and that's the example they need to set for their children too, is to, you know, this is why we learn to read. So I feel like we really need to implement the program.
Absolutely. And that's a great transition, Michelle, to this kind of broad definition of family literacy. And as I read this, you'll probably chuckle, because it's like you will say, that's not necessarily maybe within our purview of adult education services, but we end up doing a lot of this anyway, right? I mean, so the definition, Reading Rockets is a great, we're actually going to look at some examples today of really active family literacy websites with tools and resources, and Reading Rockets is one of the premier ones from the National Center for Family Literacy. But really, it's really helping particularly parents improve their parenting and literacy skills, helping young children, especially at that early childhood development age. But I mean, all the way up through, you know, even we know parents always play a vital role in their children's lives, even as an adult child, right? But especially in the early developmental age, and particularly, I think, both for your programs, as we talk about the ESL population as well, and transitioning culturally to a new country, that language barrier that comes up as they're communicating and working with their children's teachers, and making friends and understanding those boundaries and barriers, sometimes with cultural differences. This can include an in-home visit or other enrichment activities. I know that that's not typically the in-home portion part of ours, but I also hear stories from so many of our adult educators about how they do drop things off at home, at someone's home, Chromebooks, laptops, paperwork. They help, you know, provide resources like transportation or housing or other resources that families need. So that in home, while we might not necessarily be conducting visits, I think that does encompass a lot of the work that we do that maybe is outside the classroom, that's still supporting those families. Because even like I said, even though we're supporting those learners, we all have those relationships with those adult learners where it's like you learn about their children, you learn about their family, and you say, well, I know someone, or I can get you the resources that can really help you or in the entire family. And so we'll hopefully kind of give a little bit more of the components and learn about kind of the pieces. So broadly as well, the federal definition. So this is according to part of the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. And so there's really three kind of functioning parts: is adult education, which we are all very familiar with. And then these other two components that I think we're also familiar with, but we don't necessarily have always embedded consistently, like what Carol was talking about, within our programs. Sometimes we have these one-off events or activities that we do. And then sometimes it's really hard to find that connection when we're talking about, especially in the adult education space, how do we connect their academic, very high level functioning on GED and those outcomes, and how do we actually relate that to parenting and kind of the development of their kids. So it also includes that parenting education piece, which sometimes seems a little distinct or different from what we're trying to provide services for. And then especially early childhood education for those young, not only preschoolers, but going into elementary school, and many of our families that have those children at that age. So those are kind of the general recognized components of family literacy across the country. There are many programs that also provide a lot of these resources within their community education program. But we also know that even within a district, like what Carol was talking about, there are different agencies within that district or different people that have that responsibility. And so sometimes it's disjointed. Sometimes our adult ed is totally different than our after school, before school enrichment program. Sometimes we don't have that because it's a community-based and not school-based program. Sometimes that parent education piece is handled by other programs like the GSRP or Head Start. And so there is kind of this disjointedness among communities. But when we drill down into it, we'll find, and we'll look at some data, is that a lot of that population is shared among all of these providers. I mean, we're really talking about the same families within each of our communities and serving them. So I think what's important when we think about family literacy and why it's important to look at providing this or embedding family literacy as a component within our programs, especially for our adult learners, is that often, especially with the ESL population and promoting and practicing English at home. And I say that with a big caveat to say that I am a true believer that a native language should be spoken within the home in terms of continuing that beauty and that language and that culture and building that within the home, but also having conversations with our students about we can still continue to speak our native language at home, but how do we also then build that dual language so that when we go out of the home and we're interacting perhaps with other folks that have English as their primary language, we're still able to navigate between those two languages. And how do we promote that and how do we kind of create that more inclusivity within our ESL population there? Certainly access to childcare resources. I mean, that's like number one priority on every person's mind is where is a stable place and stable environment for my children to be if they're not yet in school? And what are the documents and the resources that I need? When I was at the local program level, we had a childcare center, and that was one of the most arduous processes for our population, primarily ESL, to even enroll in our childcare setting. And walking them through the immunization records that they needed to have for their children, completing the documentation, understanding if that child had a different last name than what they did, and the parental rights that are involved with that, the guardianship, who's able to collect that student at the end of the day or that child at the end of the day, all of those components, right? And finding that, and especially even just as simple as you need to have a spare change of clothes for your child in case they have an accident at school. And that was a component that was very challenging when we're working with different adult learners and even ESL learners in particular. Certainly, I think all of us would agree that parenting is a big component of this that we often run into in conversations with our adult learners because it's at the forefront of their mind. They've got challenges with children of all ages, but also they have, concerns or they want to get them involved just as we're having conversations with them. Certainly, we want to promote reading at home. That's one thing that we've already talked about, but just increasing that literacy at home and how crucial and important it is to do that, even in small increments over a variety of different topics. And not only just reading, but having that conversation and interaction at home about education and about different things going on within our day as family units. Conversations between parents and teachers, which we talked about, improving school readiness. That's another major component. I don't know how many times that we've talked with education providers about how ill-prepared young children are as they enter into school. And so one of the things that I want us to talk about today is even what are spaces within your adult education program to approach different educators within your district, within your agency that you work with in your community to think about how can we help the parents. You're working with the children entering kindergarten, or maybe you look at third or fourth grade. How can we help? What are the things that you need those parents to be able to do in order to better engage with you and support their children? And how can we work with you to make sure that the parents that we have that we're serving within our district, within our agency, we can support and build those skills into the programming that we do to ultimately help you in your interactions with our parents. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that today. And then certainly in the English language barrier, that continues to be at the forefront of all of our minds. So kind of as we look at national and state data, we know this impacts a lot of our adult learner participants. And I'm just going to show you some quick resources, and I will make sure that you get this PowerPoint so you can look at it. But the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, as well as the National Association of State Directors of Adult Education, had a lot of statistics around the impact of what we do, family literacy, adult education. And so one of those is just several fact sheets. So this is one from COAB, and I'll put this into the chat here. You can see that. And part of sharing this is so that we can understand our impact and understand not only the literacy levels of the adults that we're serving, but also so that we can understand the impact of who they're reaching outside of the walls of our buildings or in our virtual classrooms. So we really have a high need within our state, over 500,000 adults without a high school credential, considered, and I say this in air quotes because I think we have to offer educational opportunities for all, but the working age has been classified as 18 to 64 without a high school credential. We have a number that's changing and evolving with unemployment. Certainly we have very, very low unemployment right now because our economy has rebounded after the pandemic. But we also have this population here, about 100,000 of adults in the state who do not speak English well or at all. And so even though we have this functioning ESL population within our state, we still have a large percentage of those individuals who do not have English language abilities or skills. And certainly if we look down here, a majority of our English, our learners are adult basic education. A majority, and we'll look a little bit at Michigan's statistics towards the end of the presentation, but a majority of the adult basic education learners we have are very, very low. I mean, we serve some of the least literate individuals in our ABE system. When we get into the adult secondary education, that's certainly a smaller piece of the pie you can see there. And then our English language learners make up about a third of the overall students enrolled in adult education that we serve every year. Just want to again give you that landscape of where our students are kind of coming from, what they have access to, some of the challenges that they have. I also want to show you, if I can open this, here we will go. If it will show, maybe it won't. Let me see here. The National Adult Education State Directors Association also has different fact sheets. This one in particular, and if you give me a second, my link is not working. So I'm gonna, if I can't find it, I'm not gonna, here we go. So if you go here, you can see over the entire United States, but then you can also click down into specific by state. So I'll put this link into the chat as well. And so much of the same information that we're working on, you will see that there's some slight discrepancies in the data. So actually the NASDAQ is more up to date, July 2019 to June 30th, 2020, than the COAB one that I just showed you. So they actually identify 220,000 adults in our state who do not speak English very well or at all. NASDAQ information is updated because it's based on the latest 2020 census information. And so that COAB data kind of needs to keep track with that. Here you can see kind of, again, some of the additional challenges broken down. Number of adults without a high school diploma and a public assistance, which is something that certainly we encounter with a lot of our adult learners. And then 8% is the percent of children living in a household headed by an adult without a high school diploma. So these are just important kind of things as we look at, these are the populations that we're trying to serve and part of the broader landscape of what we're trying to do. And a little bit later, as we have some discussion time, we'll break that out into some Michigan numbers. So how do we get started with kind of understanding this in our program and what it looks like? So this is a great opportunity for us to have a discussion about this. But one strategy that the National Center for Family Learning recommends is really as a part of your registration or intake process, or even a part as your first class, or over a series of as adult learners are enrolling, is to really assess those adult learners and families on their engagement in a number of different activities. They have a link to a survey that I will include and send to you all. But really the survey asks them simple questions about issues related to family literacy. This can include how many families do or do not read to their children on a daily or weekly basis. How many go to the library? How many have access to a library card? Uh, if you know a lot about the Michigan electronic library system as well, there are so many resources, free resources available for families, videos that they can rent, YouTube videos that they can watch. They have access to really anything that has ever been published and access at their fingertips now. It's not just necessarily a brick and mortar library. So that should be kind of something for you to think about as you're looking at that. How many purchase books or magazines or other reading materials? And I think this goes to like what you're saying, Michelle, is when we think about reading, we have to think about the many different aspects of how we get information, the types of information. We could be reading a book about sports cards with our children that's still increasing their literacy skills. We're still having conversation around things that are interesting to them, something that they want to learn more about. Doesn't necessarily have to be To Kill a Mockingbird, even though it's a great book, right? And so I think that's a very important point that you made, is helping our adult parents understand that as well, and understanding that for their children as well. What are places that we can engage with them on reading and learning and talking about those things? Also thinking about for your program, whether or not it would be better, or if you have the capacity to start with a singular event around family literacy, or if there are ongoing types of events that you'd like to have within your program. Are there components that we're looking to embed within our system? Are we wanting our teachers to all be working on this? Should we start, just with one kind of event to kick this off and then pull out some components for what we work on? That would be something to think about. And how do we kind of maybe already engage or interact with either existing events that are going on, or do we need to kind of create our own opportunity for our specific population, or can we connect them with others? So let me just ask you both, Michelle and Carol, as you kind of are thinking about this, are you thinking about kind of ongoing activities, or are we kind of thinking about a singular event, or maybe you're not sure at this point either?
I'm thinking ongoing, but I think we need something to kick it off. So maybe an event to kick it off, but then making sure that we have, like I said, in each of our locations, something that's ongoing, a mini library, time set aside to read for the kids, or even say it's a bring your kid to school night, we're going to do some stories or some reading or something like that. An unusual thing happened at my location. We were broken into, and not really, it was more vandalizing. Nothing was taken, but it's forced us to have to meet somewhere else for this week. And so we were meeting at our the community library, and it was almost a good thing, because one of our ESL students that came in signed up for a library card. He said, I didn't even know, and so he was able to become familiar with that library and the ease of getting a library card. And he wanted to bring his daughter in the next night so that she could get some books. And I thought it was just ironic how, you have this bad thing kind of happen, but look, it kind of ended up being a good thing. And my student walked around, looked at the books. I had a couple of adult ed students, and they were just, it's like they'd never been in a library before. I know they must have when they were younger, but it's just, it was brand new to them. So even a kickoff event of, hey, we're going to meet at the library tonight, or something like that, so that they can understand how to do the library cards and become familiar with that process. So, but I'm thinking ongoing more than just a one-time event.
I agree with you. We need a kickoff event, but then an ongoing, because when you create that routine, then people are more likely to share with their family members and friends, hey, this is happening and I went to it, let's go back. a couple of years ago, well, pre-pandemic, I did attend a family night, I think at the Troy Board of Education building. And it really, it was so nice because I did see many of my adult students with their children. And Troy gave out family board games and school supplies. It was really a nice event. And, you know, everything kind of stopped for the last 2 years. So now we just need another kickoff event and just start, like, I think the ongoing activities.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting to think about what we can actually do now that we can maybe talk about doing in person again, right? Or hybrid
Right.
even, you know, looking at that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know so many of our learners are still engaging with us in a virtual format too. So no matter either ongoing or in person, I think it's good to look at some goals. Certainly we want to establish the importance of family literacy for our students, but also for our staff. And I say that from a planner and a teacher as well. It can't just be another thing that we're trying to do. It has to really be holistic and embedded within what we're trying to do. We can't have our staff feel like it's another burden of something. Oh, I got to do this, right? It has to be kind of fluid. And it does
Yes.
take a little bit in order to make that happen. But I think with coordination and allowing them to be a part of that process is really important. Obviously demonstrating the awareness of reading and the importance of literacy and what it can do. Certainly introducing a lot of activities. Part of what is also important is knowing that we can enable our adult learner parents to develop the skills that they need to have for ongoing activities within their home. So it doesn't always just have to be on us as the providers, adult education providers, to be the one to always be doing the activities, right? We may have an annual event that introduces new strategies that we're asking our parents to be involved with. And then that's kind of, you know, part of building up their capacity is saying, if you're coming in and you want to be an engaged citizen and you want to be a good parent and a good student, here are some strategies that you can be working on with your family at home and introduce within your family structure and family unit. I also think it's important for goals, and that there's not really a better word for goals. What I don't mean is necessarily that it's goals that we got to write down. We have to have this large conversation about, and, you know, goals can be overwhelming. But I really think about, you know, helping our adult learners understand what the power of literacy can do for their child and for their children, and what are markers that they can be looking at. What are questions that they can have when they're having conversations with their children's parents, friends' parents, or with their teachers? You know, what does that look like so I know that my child is growing? And what are kind of the questions that I should be to be an advocate for my child within the educational spaces, just as we're trying to help our adult learners be advocates for their own selves and their educational opportunities. And then certainly, obviously, all of this, where it directly relates even to our programming, is increasing their fluency levels so that, you know, they're making gains on their end and they're learning and ultimately helping our program as well. So one thing that I wanted to show you is the Pennsylvania adult education system has really taken a lot of time to incorporate over a series of different lessons, and they're kind of in a pilot phase right now, looking at how they can incorporate different family literacy and digital literacy elements into lessons. And that includes looking at math writing components, a math component, or some sort of technical skill component in nearly every lesson. Part of this, I will say, I think is good teaching, right? Is that we have these wraparound, you know, things. We always have a lesson that incorporates some sort of speaking, some sort of writing, some sort of, you know, kind of more discovery or exploration. But I also think that it's very holistic, their approach. They've looked at different units, and I wanted to show you a little bit about the work that they're doing and get us to think about ways that as we're working with our teachers, and part of this I know is at the end of the year, but as we come back into the fall, or even as we think about year-end conversations, how can we kind of incorporate some of these into this. This is a very large document, and so I, I recognize that to necessarily share this with your uh, teams could be a little overwhelming, you know, especially at this juncture in the year when they're like, yeah, okay, guys, yeah, I'll read it, sure. But one of the things that I thought was really cool and important was that at the beginning of this, they kind of explained from an adult learner perspective what the outcomes were for the adult learner to be engaged in doing some of these family literacy activities. And so all related back to that adult learner. It's more than them just reading to their child. It really is by reading to their child, what are the skills that they're not only teaching their children, but they're also developing while they're doing that. So they've really kind of taken that work, kind of like the brain work out behind it. And so they've broken it down by in all of these lessons, as they've incorporated some of these family literacy activities. Here are some of the workplace skills, some of the workplace knowledge, and some of the employability skills that adults are either working toward or achieving or mastering as they're engaging in these activities. So some of them, you know, are observing things from a critical lens, asking questions as they're reading with their children, asking questions as they're reading for themselves at home. How do I know this information? Where did I get this information from? Is this information accurate? Do I need to compare and look at other information, which are skills that we're always teaching in our adult education classrooms, right? An employability skill could be working in teams, talking with their children about you had a challenge at school, or we're reading something about I don't know, I'm just thinking about a child that is being bullied or having a challenge within the school. How can they parlay that into conversations about what's going on at their children's school and what it means to problem solve and work through those issues with teammates or people that we don't understand, or are learning about new cultures and abilities or skill levels of other people and not judging them. And then obviously workplace knowledge. So if there are actual concepts that we're learning. So thinking about literacy as a tool of, maybe as a family, we're going to explore what it means to make birdhouses this summer as a family project, right? Or even doing the ice cream, the salt rock ice cream that, is really, really cold when you got to shake it for forever and ever and ever. But what are kind of the skills or technical aspects of some of this lifelong learning components that are pulled out? So I actually thought it was fantastic how they went through and did a lot of that kind of legwork. And then, like I said, they incorporated and broke it down into different mathematical concepts, different writing concepts that you could embed and incorporate within your standard lesson plans that you're working on. I wanted to have time to kind of go through one of the particular lessons, but they even have components like this base math one, just because I see that readily. Talking about introducing, new, really the ultimate goal is to introduce the idea of fractions to the adult learner. And so they were having them identify different shapes and different fractional components. But the family literacy component of the lesson was to have them work with their children to identify, and it, depending on the lesson, it focuses either on young children or maybe on like middle age or high school level students. So I want to put that out, is that, asking a high school student to go and identify what triangles are is they're probably just laugh at their parent, right? But so there is some age component differences that you might want to look at. But for example, for young children, it was asking them to engage or talk with their children about what kind of shapes do they like? How do they know what different shapes are? Can they recognize different shapes? What are different activities that we could do around shapes? What are different components that we could incorporate into our classroom or within our learning, and kind of just extending that learning with their children and reinforcing. Now, certainly it's very fundamental, maybe compared to fractions and geometry that they're talking about, if they're talking about their 5-year-old, but really just building that component. What are you learning about within your classroom and about shapes, about fractions, about those different components. And so just that approach I thought was really powerful to reinforce for parents, because I also think that even a part of this whole family literacy component is, what are we making our parents feel comfortable to engage with their children, especially if their children now are at a point where maybe they have a higher English language fluency than their parents, or maybe they're learning concepts, especially like an ABE student. You know, if my child's in algebra 2 and I'm really struggling just with algebra, you know, I there's there may be some lack of confidence, there may be some embarrassment about that, not understanding how to relate to their children because they're learning concepts that you either don't understand or don't know much about. And so I just really like this approach. Other things like questions, especially around this unit, were like, what are different series or different things that you see within different forms and different shapes, and helping children, especially at the developmental level, recognizing patterns, recognizing sounds, you know, how all of this kind of embedded into one unit. So we could have a whole day about this, you know, kind of structuring of it, but they've kind of embedded some of this piece within their lesson planning. And I just think, you know, even when we're working with our teachers and kind of thinking about that, what are things that we could ask them to incorporate within their programs? Maybe it's just as simple as, you know, before the student leaves, or as homework, or as takeaways for the day, what's something that they're going to share out with their family, or how can they work with their child to identify, you know, maybe a lesson that they've worked on today, and or maybe they can kind of incorporate some of those activities as they go home. And maybe it doesn't have to be every night, but maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a week, and kind of working with them to do that. Recognizing also that places a lot on our educators to kind of have a general understanding of their parents or their people that they're working with, and if they have children. So part of this is that process, right? And kind of understanding holistically how we reach all of our learners. Here, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what a standalone event might look like. Certainly there's a lot that goes into planning these events. Some of them are more natural and fluid. You know, if we ever have an open call for food, I think, you know, people, they get it. They will bring food, they will, you know, we got that. That's, you know, no, we're not but when you have those components put in place, the other components kind of come naturally together. So the National Center for Families Literacy kind of talks about these different components of a standalone family literacy event. Having an actual schedule for an evening, that there is actually a structure to it. It isn't a matter of just inviting families to come and we'll kind of figure it out. It really is having some structure to it, but also involving community partners in the conversation, which we'll talk about and why that's important. If there's any assignments or responsibilities, certainly spreading the work among everyone is important. You know, it shouldn't just be Carol that's organizing in the entire event, even though Carol is probably the one that will organize the entire event. But what are the responsibilities that we can all take to either prepare for the event or actual responsibilities the day of the event? Looking at program materials, you know, going the extra mile to say, what are the handouts that are available for parents? What are the takeaways that we can have? Now, you know, we're doing so much with QR codes even, you know, and so maybe we don't need to have 50,000 handouts. Maybe we have QR codes that instead of taking the paper home and then throwing it out or leaving it on the cover or stuffing it in a drawer somewhere, we have it be a living component of our website, or we have if our teachers have a website that they do or Google Docs that they share, how can we kind of embed from the technology standpoint kind of these things? Certainly advertising it, and then really thinking about if there are individual activities that should be taking place, or if these activities should be in one individual setting. And there's really no right or wrong answer. It really is kind of a feel of your capacity, your spacing, like you know, Carol, you know, they have a large center where they, you know, have programming. And Michelle, you were talking about how you have various centers, right? So kind of understanding the landscape a little bit of of what our capacity is, who do we have that can help with this, and will our team really be responsive to it. Here are just some other local kind of things to think about when you're incorporating to make your jobs a little easier, and to feel like you don't have to be both the planner and the entertainer and the educator. It's like, let's let some other folks who have those skills as well be involved in this process. So obviously the local district libraries, we all know that they will come to anything, bring resources, but they have access to a lot of different resources that they are so willing to share. Several local district libraries, to make a long story short, I've been involved with a lot of conversations with them just about family literacy, and they, are always talking about different events, obviously, that they have going on that they want families to go to, but they also just have cool things that they give away. They have discounts to lots of different restaurants. And I mean, they just have lots of different resources that are available free. They have a lot of educational resources for both parents and children. They can help parents get like reader glasses. They have lots of different, perhaps like reading filters. So like plastic reading filters that someone can put over their information while they're reading to help them have better visual acuity and be able to see, because oftentimes black ink on white paper can be very distracting to the eye and really kind of prevent someone from actually doing the reading fluency. They can also help a lot of times administer hearing tests, low cost. It's not necessarily, the one that you might have at a doctor's office, but they can help with some visual acuity and auditory hearing tests. And so they actually do have a lot of resources, including, audiobooks, access to online, spaces and things like that. So they're a good resource to get involved in terms of not only introducing resources to staff, but to families and how to use that. Certainly, bringing in, from a showcase standpoint, if you wanted to bring in some community volunteers or city and county leaders, that's probably something that your directors are always thinking about, is how do we showcase what we're doing and the awesome things that we do? But also thinking about it as a terms of, this is an event where we're highlighting the work of our adult learners, we're highlighting their family, but we also want to showcase that there are additional opportunities for them. And so even inviting local community colleges or universities to come in so that they can have exposure to the adult learner population, but also thinking about transitions for those adult learners, where are spaces that they can have conversations, even bringing their children to these events. It can be when we think about family literacy, we're really educating the whole family. So having some local college or university contacts and telling our adult learners, why don't you bring your junior, senior, or sophomore in high school, and we'll have some colleges there, and you can have a whole consultation right on our site to be able to do that as a part of increasing their awareness of educational opportunities. One thing that we encountered when I was at my local adult ed program was even local fraternities and sororities have to do so many volunteer hours. And so we tapped into them to actually come in and do actual like reading. So we, when we did our family literacy night, we would actually have reading rooms. And so that's always the biggest challenge, right? Is to finding people that will be able to come in or want to help, organize the activities, or want to, not just having our teachers or us having to do everything, right? And so tapping into those kind of groups that need those kind of hours, or want to, and then that can do it and maybe don't need a lot of instruction, right? Hey, we want you to read this story. Here are some components about how to read, certainly show the pictures and that sort of thing. And they got it. They can do it. And they're willing to do that. Obviously looking at celebrity readers, adult learners will love to see their teacher be the reader, right? But also thinking about, our directors. All of our learners know our directors and they respect our directors and getting them engaged, but even people within our local community that are respected, the police officers, the firefighters, the maybe elected officials, maybe there's a really great coach within the district that, people like, and just thinking about expanding that network a little bit more, or maybe there's people within the community that work or engage with your populations that people know about. You know, gosh, we had our janitor, you know, all the students knew him, you know, they saw him every day. Mike, everybody loved Mike, and he was so helpful. And I was like, hey, Mike, why don't you be a part of our reading night tonight? Because everybody knows you, but they don't get to engage with you in that way, right? And he loved it, right? And then certainly local workforce development partners, and thinking about ways that we can include them in just these conversations and kind of these outcomes. I know we're kind of coming to an end of our time, but if you don't mind, and I understand if you have to drop out, but I wanted to kind of close us with some, you know, final thoughts, and then we can open it up to some questions. But I wanted to leave you with just a few other kind of programming pieces as you're thinking about this, not only for one event, but ongoing. So one way to think about this is tying some of this in with maybe your certificate night or with the end of the year celebrations. Obviously, maybe incorporating a reading room or an opportunity for that. We talked about the giveaways and things like that. One thing that I've heard lots of programs do across our state is reaching out to local movie theater and asking for free popcorn, just like many schools do, and just saying, hey, we're having this event. We would like a one big bag of popcorn that will feed a million people, right? It's kind of like the Mary Poppins bag that keeps going and going and going. And they're willing to do those kinds of things. And just reaching out and asking about, you know, hey, we're doing this event and we'd like you to do that. One time we actually just even called Jimmy John's and said, hey, we're doing this family literacy event. Is there any way that you could give us free sandwiches, you know, free samples? And they're like, absolutely, we can do that. That's a part of our mission. It's a part of our, you know, and I think we got like 50 free sandwiches that, you know, were cut in half, but I mean, it's like, wow, you know, here we have more, you know, things that we're looking for. So just thinking about things creatively, but also incorporating a lot of this into your ongoing lessons or classes in terms of one activity was a make a book. So it was a final end project for parents where they had to do a portfolio of their kind of highest level ESL transitioning to ABE class. But then we also had a mirror child make a book activity. So we said, as a part of that final portfolio component, you actually have to go home and work with your child to make a book. And all we did, it depended on age, but we just had little sandwich bags and we stapled them together at the corners. And then they had to put a picture into each of the little sandwich bags, and they had to work with their child and write a little bit about, you know, that experience or that, and that was kind of their portfolio that their child made. And that was a part of their broader portfolio about how have they demonstrated mastery in English language and things like that. So those are just kind of just some activities or ongoing things. There's a really great video here that talks about this whole model about serving the family through family literacy. But I wanted to show you before we leave, there's just a lot of great literacy websites for parents and kids. So that Reading Rockets is one of them, but a lot of these have not only different stories, but like this Kids Read offers a lot of book reviews or suggestions. So I was even thinking, you know, even when we're thinking about working with our parents, like especially even around the holidays when we don't know what to buy the kids for the, you know, Christmas and things like that, you know, what are suggestions or things that they can be involved in, and learning about what are the hot topics and trends, or gosh, my child wants to read this or watch this movie and I don't really know what it's about. You know, there's just resources out there that we could incorporate within our own lessons that will help them be better parents. Certainly when we get into summer and think about some of these activities where there's, you know, reading or math free programming that's out there that, you know, maybe encouraging our parents to look at and say, you know, let's try to work an hour a week or an hour every 2 weeks with our children over the summer to do lots of these different things. So I will make sure that you have these included. It also includes some applications from Common Sense Media that you could go and look at. There's like phone apps that you know, want to suggest to them, but these are just some really good resources that have already been vetted across the nation that really are reputable and kind of provide a lot of resources. So hopefully the whole point of this professional development was to kind of get you thinking about not only ways that we can embed, but we can kind of kickstart this conversation again about how critical and important this family literacy component is. So we could absolutely deep dive another time into a lot of these resources and maybe think about it. And maybe even we need to have a collaborative group that meets that can talk about some of these things. I'm absolutely open to us doing that. But what are kind of some of the, I know we kind of sped through that last bit, but what are some takeaways or things that you're still thinking about, or maybe new ideas that you have after kind of going through today?
So I have two that the first is, our classes, our adult ed classes, ESL, are 3-hour classes. And I can see that even starting with my next class next week, at the end of the class, save 5 or 10 minutes and ask the questions to the students of all the things that we shared and learned and talked about and practiced today. What's one or two, what are 1 or 2 items that you can take home and share with your children, with your spouse, with your family, with your neighbors, with your friends? What can you talk about right away? How can you use this information? I like that. And then my second takeaway that I'm really looking forward to would probably happen next year. And it would be the certificate and reading night. And to host that so that families can come. And I like the idea of community or celebrity readers, or maybe even when our ESL 3 students graduate, maybe ask them to return and read something to us. That way they can bring their family, and it can be a moment of pride for them. So I like those are my 2 immediate takeaways, in addition to a bunch others.
Yeah, I loved all the resources you just showed us, because I think we'll get some good ideas from looking at through those. And I like the reading night a lot. And we share our building with a church, our location, and at least mine specifically. And I was just thinking, I wonder if we can kind of coordinate with the church to do the reading rooms, or because they serve too this population that we have in this apartment complex that are it's a lot of refugees that live there, a lot of foreign families new to the country. We have a lot of a population of the less fortunate, I guess, that they are really working hard to try and make a better life for themselves. So I can just see with that population that we serve together, maybe we could do some of this together. And we also have like a giving closet in our building. I'm just trying to think of some ways too that we can pull together and do that with the community, incorporate with them. But we have a theater just down the street from us. I'm thinking, oh, that's a great idea to grab that pop, ask for some popcorn for that, or so many ideas. The survey, because that's trying to get it incorporated and trying to figure out how we're going to pull it all together. Having it be maybe part of our enrollment, so that it shows that it's important to us. It's an important skill that they have to have, not only to pass the GED and to get through their high school completion classes, but just to make their family life a little bit better and to understand what they're reading. And I don't know, there were just some really great points pulled together today that I wrote down with helping them to learn how to read, to communicate with teachers. And so lots of great things that I am hoping to take back and implement. And I know we don't have much time left this year, but I don't know, why not at the end, like you said, the certificate and reading night. So some things we could still maybe do this year.
You both brought up great things. a lot of this is still work, right? And it's still, you know, we have goals and then it's like, oh, we actually got to do it. But I think the reward is so great in terms of making some of these minor tweaks or changes, even like surveying, like you said at the beginning of the intake, adding a couple, those 3 little questions, and then knowing at the end of the program year that every single learner who has come through our doors is now, you know, has a Michigan Library e-card or you know, that's an achievement for us. That's an achievement not only for us but for them and for their families and their whole, you know, whether or not they always continue to use that, you know, just like with everything we teach them, right? That's, you know, that's a little bit of their responsibility, but knowing that and that we can say that and we can demonstrate that that is what our program gives back to the community and does for the community, I think just is really valuable for us to think about those things. So I'm glad there were some takeaways for you all to think about. I'm certainly happy to continue this conversation and think about, you know, continuing to meet and just thinking about these ideas and brainstorming or sharing, you know, after if you all decide to end up doing events and thinking about, you know, what worked and what didn't, or gosh, I heard this other strategy that would just really work. What does anyone think? I absolutely think that we could develop a cohort to kind of talk about some of these things. Another one that I was just thinking about was one of our member programs, Dominican in Detroit, actually started a community garden. And so part of what the director there wants to do is, first of all, not only they developed this community garden as a part of their GED class, and they were talking about biology and science, and so that kind of added into horticulture and things of that nature. But one of the things that she wants to do this summer is actually do a like reading in the garden. And so where there's actually kind of this outdoor classroom space where it, you know, kind of incorporating continued work on the garden and what that looks like, but you know, kind of having an event, you know, around we've built this space, this community, and now you can bring your children to come learn about this garden that you've been a part of and you've grown and you've fostered, and having kind of some sort of a reading component. Another one of our member programs, Sienna, did a family reading night and movie night last summer. And so they invited folks to come to their program, and they, you know, had a movie night, and then they read a short story that went with it. I think they did it around, it was like a 28, 30-minute video. So it wasn't like they had a 2-hour movie, but they did a short little movie. And then had a reading night component, had some giveaways, had some, you know, prizes and things like that. And it just, you know, was really, and then they tied it with their National Honor Society induction. And so the parents got to be recognized and got to have their opportunity in the limelight. And then their kids also got the opportunity to kind of learn about what their parents actually do at school when they go to this mysterious building or whatever. And then it was just like a fun family event for all. And they all got to go walk away with, you know, some pizza and a few prizes and things like that. So, you know, I just think these are things that we can do. I think that we should do them to celebrate our learners and their families and all the success that they have. So, well, thank you all for coming, and hopefully you have a great weekend. We will make sure we get all this information to you along with the recording if you want to go back to look at anything. And if you have any year-end events, let me know. And if it works out, we can try to attend those. And I hope everyone has a great summer. And maybe we'll see you next week at the MAETC if you guys are going to that at all as well.
Well, thank you, Patrick. This was really helpful. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Patrick.
You guys have a great weekend, okay?
Thanks.
Okay,
You too.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.